24 minutes. You left your post for 24 minutes.
Sir, there was a device in the east sector. I had to...
Had to what? Run? Now you're running off post in the middle of the night like a coward.
My father is dead, sir.
Preston ripped the badge off his chest.
Then he can't see what a disgrace you turned out be. You don't deserve to wear this. Publicly, you never did.
Preston didn't even blink.
I was disarming a bomb.
46 soldiers watched. Not one said a word.
Dishonorable discharge. Get him off my base.
And not one of them knew. If Landon Hayes hadn't left that post, none of them would be standing here right now. Landon grew up in Macon County, Alabama. Not the Alabama you see in tourism ads. The green hills, the Gulf beaches, the college football Saturdays. This was the other Alabama. The one nobody puts on a brochure. Roads turned to dirt 2 miles outside of town. Nearest hospital was a 40-minute drive. His father, Earl, died in a construction accident when Landon was 7, crushed under a concrete slab at a job site that had already failed 2 safety inspections. Nobody was held accountable. Nobody went to jail. The construction company paid out $12,000. That was the price they put on Earl Hayes' life. His mother, Violet, used $6,000 for the funeral. She stretched the rest across 18 months of rent, rationing it the way people ration water in a drought, carefully, anxiously, knowing it would run out. Violet worked 3 jobs. Morning shift at the poultry plant, where the line moved so fast she came home with her fingers swollen. Afternoon shift folding laundry at the motor lodge off the highway. Weekend shift stocking shelves at the Dollar General on Route 9. Landon learned early, earlier than any kid should have to, that nobody was coming to help. Not the government, not the neighbors, not God. You either figured things out yourself or you went without. Behind their house, a quarter-mile through the trees, sat the remains of an old Army training ground. Decommissioned in the 80s, chain-link fence rusted through in a dozen places. Local kids played there daily. Landon was 9 the first time he found one. A corroded M33 fragmentation grenade wedged between 2 drainage pipes. Pin intact, but the casing had cracked. Any hard impact could have set it off. He didn't run. He sat in the dirt and studied it, traced the seams, figured out which parts were stable. Then he walked home, found needle-nose pliers in his father's toolbox, walked back, and extracted the detonator assembly. 9 years old. Over 4 years, he pulled 11 pieces of unexploded ordnance out of that ground. Taught himself from library books and salvaged Army manuals. Never told anyone. He just did it. Quietly. Precisely. Because kids played there every afternoon, and he knew what would happen if he didn't. At 18, he walked into the Army recruiting office in Montgomery with nothing but a high school diploma and hands that understood how things came apart. He didn't enlist for glory. He didn't enlist for college money. He enlisted because the Army was the only place where the thing he was good at, the thing that made his breathing slow down instead of speed up when everyone else was panicking, actually had a name. Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Fort Ridgeway, outside El Paso. Desert heat, chain link to the horizon, guard towers every 200 meters. High security, high tension, zero tolerance for deviation. Landon fit in the way a quiet man fits anywhere. Did his work, kept his head down, didn't complain when he pulled the worst shifts 3 weeks running, didn't complain when his name got skipped for promotion, didn't complain when Preston called him the quiet one, 2 words that carried the weight of an entire judgment. Preston had been at Ridgeway 11 years, decorated twice, connected to people above him who owed him favors, untouchable in the way that only men who have never been held accountable can be. He ran his unit like a machine, every bolt tight, every gear aligned, every part replaceable. He knew the name of every soldier under his command. He knew their ranks, their assignments, their fitness scores. But knowing someone's file is not the same as knowing who they are. And Landon Hayes, in Garrett Preston's machine, was a part he had never bothered to understand, and never intended to. 2 questions hung over Fort Ridgeway that summer. How far could bias go before it destroyed someone who didn't deserve it? And just how good was Landon Hayes at the one thing nobody knew he could do? Both were about to be answered. Same night, 24 minutes. Fort Ridgeway ran on routine. Wake at 0500, formation at 0530, chow, drills, post assignments, repeat. Every day looked the same. Every day sounded the same. And for Landon Hayes, every day felt the same, like being invisible in a room full of people who could see just fine. He had been at Ridgeway 14 months. In that time, he had completed every assignment, passed every evaluation, never missed a shift, never filed a complaint, never raised his voice in a briefing. The kind of soldier who should have been promoted twice by now. The kind of soldier who kept getting passed over without explanation. His bunk was in Barracks C, the oldest building on base. Cracked walls, unreliable plumbing, the unit's unofficial storage for soldiers nobody wanted to deal with. There were 4 other men in Barracks C. 2 were on disciplinary probation. 1 was counting the days until his contract expired. And then there was Landon. The one person at Ridgeway who actually knew what Landon could do was Sergeant Owen Brooks. Owen was 31, from outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. He had seen enough real combat to know the difference between a soldier who followed orders and a soldier who could think under pressure. Owen had found out by accident. 3 months earlier, a supply truck had rolled in with a crate marked for disposal. Old training ordnance, supposedly decommissioned. Owen watched Landon walk over, open the crate, and within 40 seconds identify that 2 of the shells still had live primer charges. He didn't panic. He didn't call anyone. He calmly separated the 2 shells, removed the primers with a multi-tool, and handed them to Owen like he was returning a borrowed pen. "Where'd you learn that?" Owen had asked. He was staring at Landon's hands. Steady, precise, not a single tremor. The hands of a man who had done this 100 times before. "Alabama," Landon said. And that was all he said. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't tell Owen about the training ground behind his house, or the grenade at 9 years old, or the 11 devices he'd pulled from the dirt before he was old enough to drive. He just handed back the multi-tool and walked away. From that day, Owen understood. Landon Hayes wasn't just a quiet soldier doing his time. He was the most naturally skilled ordnance handler Owen had ever seen, and nobody in command knew it because nobody in command had ever asked. Preston certainly hadn't asked. To Commander Garrett Preston, Landon Hayes was a line item, a name on a roster, a body filling a post. Nothing more. Preston ran his weekly briefings like court proceedings. He stood at the front. Everyone else sat. He spoke. Nobody interrupted. And when he assigned shifts, there was a pattern that everyone noticed but nobody mentioned. Landon got Sector East 7. Every time. The worst post on base. Isolated, exposed, with a blind spot in the camera coverage that maintenance had been promising to fix for 6 months. It was the post you gave someone you wanted to punish. One Tuesday evening, Landon approached Preston after a briefing. Respectful. Direct. "Sir, I've noticed a gap in the sensor grid along the eastern perimeter, between towers 4 and 6. If someone wanted to approach from the drainage system, they could get within 200 yards of the barracks without triggering a single alarm." Preston didn't look up from his clipboard. "Are you an engineer now, Hayes?" "No, sir, I just—" "Then stick to your post and stop wasting my time with theories." Landon nodded, walked out, didn't argue. Owen was waiting in the hallway. He'd heard the whole thing. "He didn't even look at you," Owen said. "He never does." Landon's voice wasn't bitter. It was flat, the kind of flat that comes from years of accepting something that should never have been acceptable. Owen wanted to say more, wanted to say this isn't right or you should go above him or someone needs to hear this. But he knew how the Army worked. He knew what happened to soldiers who went around their commanders, especially soldiers who looked like Landon. So he said nothing, and he hated himself for it. That night, Landon sat on his bunk with a small mechanical device in his hands, a trigger assembly he'd built from spare parts. He took it apart, put it back together, took it apart again. It was how he thought, how he calmed down, how he reminded himself that complicated things could always be understood if you were patient enough to study them. Outside, the desert wind pushed sand against the windows. Somewhere on the base, a generator hummed. And 200 yards east, in a drainage pipe that no sensor covered and no camera reached, something sat in the dark that nobody knew about yet. The gap Landon had reported was real, and someone had found it. The call to post came at 2200 hours. Landon pulled on his gear, grabbed his rifle, and walked out into the dark. Sector East 7, same post, same silence, same stretch of desert that disappeared into black about 50 yards past the perimeter lights. Beyond that, nothing. Just sand, drainage infrastructure, and the kind of quiet that presses against your skull. He settled into position at the guard station. A concrete platform with a low wall, a radio, and a spotlight that hadn't worked properly since March. The nearest camera pointed north-northwest, covering the main access road. Everything east was a blind spot. Landon had reported it. Preston had ignored it. So here he was, staring into the dark with his own eyes because the equipment meant to do the job wasn't doing it. The first 3 hours passed without incident. Coyotes in the distance, wind pushing dust across the flats, the occasional crackle of radio chatter from the main gate 2 clicks west. At 0217, Landon heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not an animal, not the wind. A faint, high-pitched electronic tone, barely audible, carried in on a gust from the southeast. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then stopped, then came again. A pulse, regular, rhythmic. Landon knew that sound. He had heard it in training simulations. He had read about it in the manuals he kept under his bunk. A piezoelectric detonator signal, the kind used in pressure-activated IEDs, the kind that meant a timer was already running. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned east. The darkness gave up nothing. He switched to the thermal scope mounted on his rifle, panned slowly across the terrain. 200 yards out, just below ground level, a heat signature glowed inside the concrete drainage pipe that ran beneath the perimeter access road. His stomach dropped. Not from fear, from math. The EOD team at Fort Bravo was 43 minutes away by helicopter. The base's own ordnance response unit was 6 men, all quartered on the west side, all asleep, and none of them had handled a live device in the field. By the time anyone got here, the timer would have finished its count. Landon picked up the radio. Protocol said call it in, wait for specialists, do not approach. But protocol was written by people who had never sat 200 yards from a ticking device with 86 soldiers asleep between it and the blast radius. He keyed the radio. Nothing. Static. The East Sector repeater had been glitching for weeks. Another maintenance ticket collecting dust on someone's desk. He had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Landon opened the duty log. Wrote, 217, suspicious device, Sector E7, thermal signature in drainage infrastructure, radio non-responsive, investigating. He signed it, set the log on the guard station wall where the relief shift would see it, and started walking. 200 yards in the dark. No backup, no protective suit, no blast shield, just his hands, a Leatherman multi-tool from his belt, and 14 years of knowing how explosive devices worked. The drainage pipe was 3 feet in diameter, half buried in compacted sand. Landon dropped to his knees at the opening and angled his flashlight inside. The device sat 8 feet in, wedged between the pipe wall and a support brace. Homemade. PVC casing. A circuit board wired to a commercial cell phone battery. 2 blasting caps, and a digital timer glowing red in the dark. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Landon crawled in. The pipe smelled like rust and standing water. His shoulders scraped both sides. He couldn't turn around. If something went wrong, there was no getting out in time. He reached the device and studied it. 10 seconds, just looking, reading the wiring the way a musician reads sheet music. Not rushing, not guessing, letting the logic of the thing reveal itself. The primary circuit ran from the battery through a relay switch to the detonator. Standard. But there was a secondary wire, a trembler circuit designed to trigger if anyone moved the device. Lift it, tilt it, or cut the wrong wire, and the blasting caps would fire instantly. Landon steadied his breathing, placed his flashlight between his teeth, and went to work. First, the trembler. He traced the secondary wire to its solder point on the relay board and used the flat edge of the Leatherman to gently pry the connection loose. No cutting. Cutting sends vibration through the wire. Prying is slower but silent. The trembler circuit went dead. 3 minutes 9 seconds on the timer. Next, the primary detonator leads. 2 blasting caps, each wired independently. He disconnected the first by unscrewing the lead terminal with his thumbnail. No tools, no torque, just pressure and patience. The second cap was wedged tighter. He worked it for 40 seconds before the terminal gave. 2 minutes flat. Finally, the battery. He slid the multi-tool blade under the positive terminal and lifted it free from the contact plate. The timer display flickered once and went dark. Silence. Total, absolute silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses into your chest and holds you down. Landon lay in that pipe for another 15 seconds. Not moving, just breathing. His fingers were cramping. His shirt was soaked through with sweat. The pipe felt smaller now than when he'd crawled in, like the walls had tightened around him during those 4 minutes. He could feel his own heartbeat in his throat, in his wrists, behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he unclenched his hands, stretched his fingers one by one, let one long breath out through his teeth, and crawled backward out of the pipe. Stood up, brushed the sand off his knees, looked back at the pipe once, just once, and walked back to his post. 02:41, 24 minutes. He picked up the duty log, added a single line beneath his earlier note. Device neutralized, returning to post. He didn't wake anyone. He didn't call anyone. He sat back down at his station and finished his shift. At 0600, the morning relief arrived. Landon handed over the log, walked to Barracks C, and lay down on his bunk. He was asleep in 2 minutes. 4 hours later, Commander Preston called formation and fired him for abandoning his post. Commander Garrett Preston arrived at the security office at 0730 the way he did every morning. Coffee in hand, clipboard under his arm, and the unshakable certainty that his base ran exactly the way he wanted it to. The overnight surveillance report was waiting on his desk. He flipped through it the way he always did, scanning for anomalies, checking timestamps, looking for anything out of place. Page 1, nothing. Page 2, nothing. Page 3, there it was. Camera 7, Sector East 7. Timestamp 2:17. The frame showed Landon Hayes stepping away from the guard station. The next frame, 2:18, showed the station empty. The next 60 frames, 1 per minute, showed the same empty station. Landon didn't reappear until 2:41. Preston set his coffee down, picked up the phone. "Get me Sergeant Crawford, now!" Staff Sergeant Bill Crawford was Preston's right hand. Loyal, efficient, the kind of man who agreed with everything Preston said because agreeing was easier than thinking. He showed up in 4 minutes. "Look at this," Preston pointed at the screen. "East 7, Hayes, 24 minutes off post." Crawford looked. "Could be a patrol check. Sometimes the guys walk the—" "He's not authorized for patrol checks. He's assigned to a static post. He left." Preston leaned back. "I want a discharge recommendation on my desk in 30 minutes. Crawford hesitated. "Sir, shouldn't we pull the duty log first? See if he noted—" "I've got camera footage, Crawford. I don't need a logbook." Preston's voice dropped. The kind of drop that says the conversation is over. 30 minutes. Crawford nodded. Walked out. The duty log sat in the guard station at Sector East 7, 300 yards away. Landon's note, clear, time-stamped, detailed, was right there on the page. Nobody went to look at it. At 1000 hours, the base intercom crackled. "All personnel, Company B, formation, main yard, immediately." Landon was in Barracks C when the call came. He had been awake for 20 minutes. His hands still smelled like rust and copper from the pipe. He washed them, pulled on his uniform, and walked outside. The formation was already assembled when he arrived. 46 soldiers, 4 rows, faces blank. The desert sun pressed down on everything like a hot iron. Preston stood at the front with the manila folder. This was the moment he had been building toward all morning. Not because the violation demanded it. A first offense for leaving post would normally result in a written reprimand, maybe extra duty. But Preston didn't want a reprimand. Preston wanted a performance. He wanted every soldier on that base to see what happened when Landon Hayes stepped out of line. He wanted to make an example, and the audience, 46 soldiers standing at attention, was the whole point. What happened next took less than a minute. The words from the hook, the badge, the dirt, the silence. But there was a moment in between that the formation didn't see. A moment when Landon said, "I was disarming a bomb," and Preston's eyes flickered, just for a fraction of a second, before he blinked it away and said, "Dishonorable discharge." That flicker, that half-second pause, it meant one of two things. Either Preston didn't believe him, or Preston didn't care. And the truth was worse than either option. It was both. Preston had spent 11 years building a version of the world where his judgment was final, where his word was law, where questioning him was the same as attacking him. Landon Hayes had just said something that threatened that version. So Preston did what men like him always do. He blinked it away, chose the story that protected his ego, and threw away the man who had protected his base. After Landon was escorted out, 2 MPs flanking him like he was a threat instead of a hero, Preston turned to the formation one last time. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who believed he had just restored order. "This unit runs on discipline, not excuses. Dismissed!" The soldiers broke formation. Most walked away in silence. Some walked faster than usual, the way people walk when they want to get away from something that made them feel small. A few exchanged glances, the kind of glances that said, "Something's wrong," but never made it to words. Owen Brooks didn't glance at anyone. He stood in the yard for a full minute after everyone else had left, staring at the ground where Landon's badge had landed. Then he walked to the east perimeter. It took him 12 minutes to reach Sector East 7. The guard station was empty. The morning shift hadn't been reassigned yet. Owen opened the duty log, flipped to last night's entries. 217, suspicious device, Sector E7, thermal signature in drainage infrastructure, radio non-responsive, investigating. And below it, device neutralized, returning to post. Owen read it twice. Then he closed the log, tucked it under his arm, and started walking east. 200 yards. Past the camera's blind spot. Past the sensor gap Landon had reported weeks ago. Down the slope to the drainage pipe. He crouched at the opening and pointed his flashlight inside. The IED was still there. Disassembled. Blasting caps removed. Battery disconnected. Timer dead. Sitting exactly where Landon had left it. Because Landon hadn't moved it. He'd neutralized it in place, following textbook protocol, and left it for the EOD team to collect. Owen stood up. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. He pulled out his phone, took 6 photographs, the device, the wiring, the timer, the pipe entrance, the distance marker back to the guard station, and walked back to base. He didn't go to Preston. He went straight to the one person on base who outranked Preston and had no reason to protect him. Colonel Diana Walsh. Colonel Diana Walsh had an office on the 2nd floor of the administrative building, directly above the room where Preston held his briefings. She had been at Fort Ridgeway for 3 years. Before that, she had commanded a logistics battalion in Kabul and an intelligence unit in Stuttgart. She was 52, precise, and had 0 tolerance for waste. Wasted time, wasted resources, wasted talent. She also had a reputation. When something landed on her desk, she didn't file it. She opened it. Owen Brooks knocked at 11:15. Walsh waved him in without looking up. "Sergeant, what is it?" Owen set the duty log on her desk, then his phone opened to the first photograph. Then he stood at attention and said 6 words. "Commander Preston fired the wrong man." Walsh looked at the log, then the photos, then back at Owen. "Sit down. Start from the beginning." Owen told her everything. The IED, the blind spot, Landon's report from weeks earlier that Preston had dismissed. The camera footage that showed Landon leaving but couldn't show where he went. The duty log entry that Preston never read. The device still sitting in the drainage pipe, disassembled with surgical precision. Walsh listened without interrupting. When Owen finished, she asked one question. "Has the device been collected?" "No, ma'am, it's still in the pipe, exactly where Hayes left it." Walsh picked up her phone. "Get me Captain Torres. EOD, now!" Within 90 minutes, Fort Ridgeway's perimeter was locked down. Captain Miguel Torres and a 3-man EOD squad drove out to Sector East 7 in a blast-rated vehicle. They entered the drainage pipe and extracted the device. Torres examined it on site, then back at the lab. Then he wrote a report that would reach Walsh's desk by 1700 hours. The key paragraphs read, "The device is a non-standard improvised explosive constructed from commercially available components. PVC pipe casing, dual electric blasting caps, lithium-ion battery power source, and a digital countdown timer. The device was designed for delayed detonation with an anti-tamper trembler circuit to prevent removal. The device was neutralized in place by an individual with advanced knowledge of explosive circuitry. The trembler circuit was disconnected at the solder point, not cut, indicating awareness of anti-tamper protocols. Detonator leads were removed manually. Battery was disconnected last, following correct EOD sequencing. Whoever disarmed this device did it by hand, in a confined space, with no protective equipment, and followed procedures that align with Level 3 EOD certification standards. Estimated time remaining on the timer at point of intervention, approximately 5 to 6 minutes. Had the device detonated, the blast radius, accounting for the pipe's directional channeling effect, would have reached the Eastern Barracks complex. Estimated personnel exposure, 86 soldiers quartered in Barracks B and C. Walsh read the report twice. She set it down on her desk and sat in silence for a full minute. Then she picked up a red pen and wrote 3 words on the top of the file jacket. Expand. Full scope. She opened a second investigation, not into Landon Hayes, but into Commander Garrett Preston. The findings came fast, not because the evidence was hard to find, not because it required special clearance or forensic expertise. It came fast because it had been sitting in plain sight for years. Nobody had ever looked. Nobody had ever cared enough to look. And that, in its own way, was part of the story. A system that worked perfectly well for the people it was designed to protect and failed completely for everyone else. Preston's assignment records showed a clear pattern. Over the previous 14 months, Landon Hayes had been assigned to Sector East 7 on 71 out of 89 eligible shifts. No other soldier in the unit had been assigned to the same post more than 19 times. The scheduling was not random. It was targeted. Performance evaluations told the same story. Landon's scores were consistently above average in every measurable category: marksmanship, physical fitness, technical knowledge, conduct. Yet he had been passed over for promotion 3 times. Each time the reviewing officer was Preston. Each time the written justification was vague. Needs more development. Not yet ready for increased responsibility. Adequate but unremarkable. 3 other soldiers in the unit, all of them men of color, had filed informal complaints about Preston over the past 2 years. One reported being called "boy" during a briefing. Another said Preston had questioned whether he'd earned his position or had it handed to him. A third described being assigned to perimeter duty in a sandstorm, while white soldiers of equal rank were given indoor posts. All 3 complaints had been reviewed internally by Preston's own chain of command. The same chain that reported to Preston. The same chain that owed their postings to Preston. All 3 had been dismissed with identical language. Insufficient evidence to substantiate claim. 3 different soldiers, 3 different incidents. The same 5 words every time. Like someone had copy-pasted the conclusion before reading the complaint. Walsh sat with the file for a long time that evening. She had served in the Army for 26 years. She had seen incompetence. She had seen negligence. She had seen men promoted past their abilities and left in positions of power long after they should have been removed. But this was different. This was a pattern of deliberate, sustained mistreatment, hidden behind the language of procedure and discipline. And the man at the center of it had just fired the soldier who saved his base, and done it in front of an audience, like a public execution. Walsh compiled the full file. Torres's EOD report, Owen's photographs, the duty log, the assignment records, the evaluation history, the dismissed complaints. She packaged it and sent it up 2 levels, to the Inspector General's office at Division. The IG opened a formal inquiry within 24 hours. Meanwhile, Landon was home. He had driven 14 hours straight from El Paso to Macon County. His mother's house looked the same as it always had. Small, clean, held together by stubbornness and 3 coats of white paint. Violet Hayes was sitting on the porch when he pulled in. She didn't ask what happened. Mothers in Macon County learned a long time ago that when their sons came home in uniform ahead of schedule, the reason was never good. They sat on the porch that evening. The sun went down behind the tree line. The air smelled like pine and cut grass. "What happened, baby?" Landon looked at his hands. The same hands that had disarmed a bomb 12 hours ago. The same hands that couldn't hold on to the career he'd spent 7 years building. "They let me go, Mama." Violet nodded. She didn't press. She just reached over and held his hand the way she had held it when he was 9 years old and came home with dirt on his knees and copper residue on his fingertips from a thing she never knew about. "You did something right," she said. "I can tell." Landon didn't answer. He watched the tree line disappear into the dark and listened to the crickets. 500 miles west on Colonel Walsh's desk, the file that would bring him back was already being read by people with the authority to act on it. The hearing convened on a Tuesday morning at Division Headquarters, 40 miles north of Fort Ridgeway. A long, windowless room with fluorescent lights and a table shaped like a coffin. 2 flags at the front, American and Army. 3 officers behind the table, a court reporter in the corner, and 2 chairs facing them, one for the accused, one for the witness. Commander Garrett Preston sat in the left chair wearing his dress uniform. Every medal pinned, every crease pressed. He had driven up that morning with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned by anyone who mattered. Landon Hayes sat in the right chair. He wore his Class A uniform, the same one he'd packed the day he was fired. His mother had pressed it the night before. She was sitting in the back row of the gallery, hands folded in her lap, wearing the same church dress she wore every Sunday. Colonel Walsh sat at the center of the panel. To her left, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Page from the Inspector General's office. To her right, Major Sandra Gill from the Judge Advocate General's Corps. A military attorney had been assigned to represent Landon, another for Preston. Walsh opened the proceedings at 0900. This hearing concerns the discharge of Private First Class Landon Hayes from Company B, Fort Ridgeway, on charges of abandoning his assigned post. We will review the circumstances of the discharge, the evidence gathered during the subsequent investigation, and the conduct of the commanding officer who authorized the action. She turned to Captain Torres first. Torres walked the panel through the device. He had photographs projected on a screen, the PVC casing, the wiring, the timer, the blasting caps, the drainage pipe. He spoke in the flat, technical tone of a man who had spent 20 years handling things that could kill him. The device was designed to detonate inside the drainage pipe, which would have created a directed blast channel toward the eastern barracks. The pipe acts as a barrel. Instead of a spherical explosion, you get a focused pressure wave. He paused. Let that settle. If this device had gone off at the time it was set, approximately 0223, 86 soldiers in barracks B and C would have been in the direct blast path. At that distance, with that charge weight, survival probability was near 0 for anyone within the first 40 meters of the pipe exit. Lieutenant Colonel Page leaned forward. And the individual who disarmed it did so by hand, in the pipe, no suit. No tools beyond a standard multi-tool, disconnected the anti-tamper trembler first, at the solder point, not by cutting, then removed both detonator leads manually, then disconnected the battery. That's textbook level 3 EOD sequencing. Torres looked directly at Landon. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know 6 people in the entire army who could have done what he did under those conditions. He's not certified. He's not trained through any program we have on record. And he did it better than most people I've certified myself. The room was silent. The kind of silence that happens when a group of people all realize the same thing at the same time. That the man sitting in the left chair had fired the man sitting in the right chair for saving his life. For saving all of their lives. Preston didn't move. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. His attorney was writing something on a notepad, but Preston wasn't reading it. He was staring at a point on the wall behind the panel, the same kind of stare Landon had held during the firing. Except Preston's stare wasn't disciplined. It was the stare of a man who had just heard the ground crack beneath the pedestal he'd been standing on for 11 years. Walsh turned to Preston. Commander, you reviewed the overnight surveillance footage on the morning in question. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And you observed Private Hayes leaving his post at 02:17 and returning at 02:41. That's correct. Did you review the duty log for Sector E7? Preston shifted in his chair. I reviewed the camera footage. That was sufficient. The duty log was located at the guard station, 300 yards from your office. Private Hayes wrote a time-stamped entry noting a suspicious device and his intention to investigate. Did you read that entry? No. Did you send anyone to read it? No. Did you inspect the area where Private Hayes was seen walking toward on the footage? No, ma'am. The footage clearly showed a soldier leaving his post. It did not show why. Walsh's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Did you, at any point before authorizing the discharge, ask Private Hayes why he left? Preston's jaw tightened. He had an opportunity to explain during formation. You gave him approximately 4 seconds before cutting him off. We have the testimony of 11 soldiers who confirm that. Walsh opened a folder. Commander, I'm going to read you something. She read the 3 prior complaints, slowly, one at a time, letting each one settle in the room like a stone dropping into still water. The scheduling data. 71 out of 89 shifts. The promotion denials. 3 times passed over. The language in his evaluations. Adequate but unremarkable. Written about a man who had just been described by a 20-year EOD veteran as one of the 6 best he'd ever seen. Preston sat still. His face had gone from composed to rigid to something that looked like a mask held in place by willpower alone. His attorney whispered something. Preston shook his head, the small, tight shake of a man who knows that whatever his lawyer is about to suggest, it won't be enough. Walsh closed the folder. Private Hayes, would you like to make a statement? Landon stood. He looked at the panel, then at Preston, then at his mother in the back row. Violet gave him the smallest nod, the kind only a son would notice. Ma'am, I left my post because I believed there was an immediate threat to the base. I wrote it in the log. I tried to radio for support, but the East Sector repeater was down. I made a judgment call. I disarmed the device and returned to my station. He paused. That's all I did. That's all I've ever done. The job in front of me, whether anyone was watching or not. He sat down. Walsh deliberated with the panel for 40 minutes. When they returned, she read the findings. Commander Garrett Preston, relieved of command, effective immediately. Permanent reassignment to administrative duties. Formal reprimand entered into his service record. Referral to the Equal Opportunity Office for investigation of discriminatory conduct. Private First Class Landon Hayes, discharge rescinded. Full reinstatement with back pay. Promotion to corporal, effective immediately. Awarded the Army Commendation Medal for meritorious service. When Walsh read the last line, Owen Brooks, sitting 3 rows behind Landon, exhaled for what felt like the first time in a week. Landon stood, shook the panel's hands, turned to walk back to his seat. That's when it happened. One soldier in the gallery started clapping, then another, then 10. Then every person in the room who wasn't behind the panel table was on their feet. The court reporter stopped typing. Even Major Gill, who hadn't shown a single expression all morning, pressed her lips together in the way people do when they're trying not to feel something in a room where feeling things isn't on the agenda. Preston sat in his chair, alone, medals still pinned, creases still pressed. And for the first time in 11 years at Fort Ridgeway, absolutely no one was looking at him. Violet Hayes stood in the back row, hands still folded, tears running down her face. She didn't clap. She didn't need to. Her son was standing at the front of the room, and the uniform he was wearing was his again. 6 months later, Fort Ridgeway looked the same from the outside. Same desert, same chain link, same guard towers baking under the Texas sun. But inside, things had shifted in ways that didn't show up on a map. Sector East 7 had a new camera, a new sensor array, a new repeater that actually worked. The drainage infrastructure along the eastern perimeter had been reinforced, inspected, and added to the weekly patrol route. The blind spot that Landon Hayes had reported, the one Garrett Preston had dismissed, no longer existed. Landon was still at Ridgeway, but he wasn't standing guard anymore. Colonel Walsh had authorized the creation of a small, specialized EOD training unit attached to Company B. 4 soldiers, 1 instructor. The instructor was Corporal Landon Hayes. It was the first time in Fort Ridgeway's history that a non-commissioned officer with no formal EOD certification had been given a teaching post. Walsh had to write a waiver to make it happen. Captain Torres co-signed it. The justification was one sentence. Corporal Hayes demonstrated field competence exceeding Level 3 EOD standards under conditions that would challenge most certified technicians. Landon taught the way he'd learned. Hands-on, quiet, methodical. No lectures longer than 10 minutes. No theory without practice. He brought in deactivated devices and let his students take them apart. He taught them to read wiring the way he read it, slowly, patiently, looking for the logic before touching anything. His students called him quiet behind his back, not as an insult, the way soldiers name things they respect but can't fully explain. Owen Brooks was still at Ridgeway too. He'd been promoted to staff sergeant, a recognition that came with a handwritten note from Colonel Walsh thanking him for demonstrating the moral courage this institution depends on. Owen kept the note in his footlocker underneath his socks, in the way men keep things that matter too much to display. They ate together most evenings. Owen talked. Landon listened. Occasionally, Landon would say something that made Owen stop chewing and think for 30 seconds. It was the kind of friendship that doesn't need a lot of words because the one moment that mattered had already said everything. Preston was gone. Transferred to a desk at a logistics depot in Missouri. No command, no formation, no soldiers standing at attention while he decided who mattered and who didn't. His name came up once in the barracks. Someone made a joke about it, and Owen shut it down. "He's not worth the breath," he said, and that was the last time anyone mentioned Garrett Preston at Fort Ridgeway. On a Saturday afternoon in October, Violet Hayes visited the base. Landon had arranged a guest pass weeks in advance. He met her at the main gate in his dress uniform, corporal chevrons on the sleeve, commendation ribbon above the pocket. Violet didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, adjusted his collar the way she'd adjusted it the day he left for basic training. Then she smiled. He walked her through the base, showed her the training facility, introduced her to his students who stood at attention like they were meeting a general. One of them, a 20-year-old private from Oklahoma, said, "Ma'am, your son is the best instructor I've ever had." Violet squeezed Landon's arm. "He's been teaching people things since he was 9 years old. He just didn't know it." On the way out, they passed the corridor that led to the administrative wing. On the wall, next to the base's honor roll, hung a framed commendation. Landon's name, his photograph, and beneath it, a single line. For exceptional courage and technical skill in the neutralization of an explosive threat to Fort Ridgeway personnel. Violet stopped, read it, touched the glass with her fingertips. "Your daddy would have stood here all day," she said. Landon put his hand on her shoulder. They stood there together for a moment, a mother and her son, in a hallway that smelled like floor wax and duty, looking at proof that the world had finally seen what she had always known. That evening, after Violet left, Landon walked to the eastern perimeter. He stood at the edge of Sector East 7 and looked out across the desert. 200 yards away, the drainage pipe sat quiet and empty. The sun was going down. The sky turned orange, then red, then dark. He thought about the night, the sound, the crawl, the timer, the silence after. He thought about Preston's voice, welfare trash, playing soldier. He thought about his mother's hand on his on the porch in the dark. You did something right, I can tell. Landon Hayes turned and walked back to base. Same stride, same silence. Same man who had been doing the right thing his whole life, whether anyone saw it or not. Have you ever done the right thing and gotten punished for it? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it. If this one hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because stories like Landon's, they deserve to be told.
24 minutes, one man saved 86 lives, the other threw him away for it. Landon didn't crawl into that pipe for a medal. He crawled in because 86 people were sleeping and he was the only one who could stop what was coming. No suit, no backup, just his hands and the truth that nobody in command ever bothered to see. And that's the thing about real courage. It doesn't perform, it doesn't wait for the spotlight. It shows up alone, in the dark, and when the timer's already running. Preston had 11 years of power and never once asked what Landon was capable of. Because to him, Landon was never a soldier. He was a line item. And that's what bias does. It doesn't just hurt people, it blinds you to the ones trying to save your life. So, here's what I want you to sit with tonight. What happens to a world that punishes the people who protect it, and if doing the right thing guarantees you nothing, no recognition, no safety, no fairness, is it still worth doing? Landon answered that question in the drainage pipe at 2 in the morning. What's your answer? If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs it today. Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe. Stories like this don't tell themselves.